All right, what's up, world? Reverend Lewis Tillman coming live from another amazing opportunity and episode of allcreation.org. I'm one of the reverends and guest editors as we are tackling this triumphant translation of Envisioning Transformation. I am privileged, honored, and so excited to be with another powerful woman who is making strong strides in our history today, Dr. Crystal Francis. Remember that name because it will take you many places in this world. Dr. Francis is doing amazing work in Baltimore County. And what she's doing now is county council candidate. I got to make sure I get all those C's correct. There was a lot going on right there. She also is working in the School of Business at Georgetown University, housed in our nation's capital of Washington, D.C. I'm just so blessed to have my friend on this episode with us. She has such a strong, powerful testimony and story and a lot of great information. So, Dr. Francis, thank you so much for being here with us. And of course, you already know he needs no further introduction. Our boy, Chris Searles, is also here. Chris is the editor with allcreation.org and also working with biointegrity. So we're so thankful for those platforms that are allowing us the opportunity to have these amazing conversations like the one today. So thank you, Dr. Francis, for being here with us. We're really honored and privileged to have just a moment of your busy schedule. So without further ado, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you to Chris. Thank you, Reverend Tillman, for the invitation. I can't wait to jump into the discussion today.
Awesome. So I'm not going to waste any more time. My question is, Dr. Francis, who are you and what are you working on right now?
So, as you know, I'm Dr. Crystal Francis. I am a public policy expert by trade. People call me a social entrepreneur because all of the work that I have done has been centered around ensuring that the world that we live in today is accessible, equitable, and fair for everyone, no matter what your background or what zip code you grew up in. I am the daughter of two United States Army veterans. My first job was a public servant with Social Security Administration. That was my first career out of college. But, I am a person that just genuinely has a heart for the community because I grew up in an area called Turner Station, which is a Black waterfront community in Baltimore County. A lot of history comes out of that county. Henrietta Lacks grew up in that county. I was born in Houston because both of my parents met in the Army, got married. And when my mom, who she's no longer with us, she was a disabled Army veteran. And so when she got out of the military, she came back home to Baltimore and the family came right along with her. And, I started off early just being around people who were just really, in my family, prominent, cared about their community. That phrase, not in my backyard, making sure that the community was safe, making sure that, people who may not have been relatives had access to the things that they needed. I grew up around my grandmother a lot, who had the value and the mantra of it takes a village to raise a child. So, just really in a tight-knit community. So how I ended up in the public policy space, I knew at a young age that my parents weren't going to be able to afford to send me to college. And while I did grow up in Baltimore County, the neighborhood that I grew up in wasn't the best neighborhood. It wasn't the worst, but it had its troubles. And I knew that I wanted to go to college. I knew that I wanted to pull my family out of poverty. And so I used education to do that. And I was lucky enough and smart enough to understand that I needed to get good grades in school, and went on to college to get my degree in criminal justice, graduated from University of Maryland Eastern Shore, went over to Towson University to get a master's in Homeland Security because I was exploring the criminal justice field and I didn't know how I wanted to impact it. I could have went, become an attorney. I could have went into the law enforcement side of the house, but I really had an opportunity to get internships and just explore the different careers in that field. And I settled on public policy because when I was in school, I learned about something called structural racism. I learned about systemic policies that, disproportionately impacted and marginalized communities of color, primarily African American males. And advice of one of my cousins who's an attorney, she told me, Crystal, before you go to law school, really sit in the classroom and make sure that, sit in the classroom, sit in the courtrooms, hear how the cases are tried, to really make sure you understand what attorneys do. And when I did that, I saw what is called sentencing disparity happening, that things I read about in the textbook, I saw with my own eyes. And I knew then and there that I did not want to be an attorney. I wanted to be a public policy maker because I wanted to change and dismantle the structures that perpetuate structural racism in America. And so I took that track. And so fast forward to today, I have always been involved in my community, even at a young age. I was always in rooms where sometimes I was the only African American, sometimes I was the only woman, because criminal justice is a male, Caucasian male dominated field. And while I deserved to be in a room because of my age and because I was the minority, sometimes my ideas weren't listened to. So I knew that I had to get a PhD so that people would respect my opinion, would respect what I had to say, because you don't have to have a PhD to be in the public policy field. And when I did that, let me tell you that it changed. People, I was invited to the room instead of bringing my own folding chairs. My grandmother used to say, if there's no room or seat at the table, you come and bring your own folding chair. And so that's what I would do. I would invite myself to meetings and forums, and people would look like, how did this young girl find out about this? And then when I opened my mouth and they heard, that I knew about the issues, then they started, wanting me to be a part of it. I am currently the vice chair for a volunteer organization, think tank, public policy think tank called the Maryland Alliance for Justice Reform. And sometimes when I'm leading the sessions, people are like, how did you become, if you look at the room, how did you become the vice chair? There's not that many people that look like you, but those people, they respected, my journey. They respected the fact that I had great ideas, and I kind of like paved my way into space, and were eager to have me become a part of the decision-making body. So I'll take a little pause there. And
yeah, wow. Again, you think you know somebody, and then boom, they just fire coming. So yeah, thanks so much, Dr. Francis. That was very powerful. As you were articulating the stony road that you've trod, right? I was just thinking about, you have such a dynamic, diverse, and didactic experience with education, and I think that's an environmental issue that we as Black folk, we either harp too much on, believe it or not, or we don't harp enough on it. Because I think you and I, we both grew up in a context where we might be first or second generation college students, and we're told like, yeah, you got to get to college, because the syllogism is, if you go to school and get the degree, you'll get the job, and that is what success looks like, which is a whole nother question I have for a different time. But when I look over your background, University of Maryland, Eastern Shore, UMES, shout out to that school for being the first historical Black college university identified in the state of Maryland. A lot of folks don't know that. So you have that experience, HBCU. Then Towson University, which would be considered a PWI, right, for our listeners, predominantly white institution. And then Walden University.
Yes.
Which is housed in Minneapolis, which I see a lot of advertising online for that one. And I'm not sure, would you consider that for-profit university?
That is correct.
Yeah, so to be in those three different worlds for three different stages of career progression, academic achievement is very powerful. So just real quick, what is your take on I would say the intersectionality of African-American creativity and existentialism in education? Is it needed? Especially, I know I can tell you this on this platform because we are nonpartisan, if you will, and you understand politics. But our commander in chief or chief of staff, or as people want to say, our POTUS, President Joe Biden. There was an article that he's forgiving these loans, he extended it, all that, and the conversation that keeps going out is, should our kids even go to school? Is it worth their time? Do they need to be in all this debt? And when I think about environmental justice, it is broad. So environmental violence, environmental racism, structural inclusivity, all those things that you talked about of what you saw that led you to get your PhD and then some. So yeah, if you just bless our listeners with your take on education and the Black public today.
Yeah, so education is extremely important. I don't care what level, what kind of job you want. I don't care if you want to become an entrepreneur. You need to learn something in order to be effective. I do understand that, college is not for everyone. That is a very true statement. I work at Georgetown University, one of the most prestigious universities in the nation. And in a very different capacity, because I run a entrepreneurship program for returning citizens, people who are coming home after a period of incarceration, teaching them how to become entrepreneurs because of the social stigma of having a criminal record prohibits them from getting really good jobs. So education is extremely important. One of the things that I think in our community, in my family, we're taught, you go to school, you go to college, you get a job. That's great, right? You do need to have income coming in. What I think we need to also work on is understanding that we also, need to encourage our family members to also explore entrepreneurship, because going to school, going to college to get a job, to work for someone is great. But when we talk about all the challenges in our world, just access to wealth, you can only make as much as your employer will allow, right? You got to fight for minimum wage. Right now in Baltimore County, teachers are fighting for higher wages. There's not enough emphasis on the importance of vocational education that teaches children or folks a trade where they can monetize a skill set. And that's one of the things that I think I was privileged to do, because when I was in high school, I went to a vocational high school where I graduated from high school with a certification in Cisco systems networking. So my first job was above minimum wage, but that was important for me because my mom was a disabled Army vet on a fixed income, and I was helping bring income into my household at a young age. And so I think, yes, college is so important, and we'll talk about student loan debt in a few seconds, because I also have student loan debt from my PhD, which was very, very expensive. But I look at it as an investment. I think people understand the importance of needing education beyond a high school level is so important, because nowadays, when you look at being competitive in the workforce, there are a lot of folks that are coming out that have degrees. And if you have only a high school diploma, your chances of making what we call a living wage, to be able to afford housing in the area where I live in a county, affordable housing has been one of the most crucial needs here, because looking at the data, that people have to work 49 hours to afford housing. And most of the folks that fall in that bracket do not have college education. They may have some college education, meaning maybe they went to community college for a year, but they didn't graduate. And so, yes, education is extremely important if you want to compete in the workforce.
Real quick, could you just break down that stat? Because our listeners, I know when they hear it, they're going to be like, whoa. So yes. 49 hours, we're talking not for a month, not for a quarter, we're talking full-time at minimum wage a week, which is $9 over regular full-time, right? and when you say afford housing, we're not talking about that 3-bed, 2.5-bath, 3,200 square foot house
No.
renting or putting mortgage. We're probably talking studio, 600
Yes.
feet.
And,
Okay, just
and do you mean per month or 49 hours every week to make rent at the end of the month on that?
Yes, 49 hours to make rent. So that means that people are using almost, if I'm getting paid on a bi-weekly basis, that means that more than half of my paycheck is covering housing, but I also have health care. I have, if God forbid, I have children, I have to pay to keep food in the refrigerator. I have utilities. If I live in a county, public transportation is not accessible. So if I want to afford to have some form of transportation, maybe a car, people are living paycheck to paycheck. Some people's bills are more than what they're bringing home. So now they're forced to work another job on the side. Maybe they're driving Uber, doing Amazon, or they're doing Instacart on the side. And now that work-life balance is now disrupted. And so when you take, and God forbid if you're a single parent, man or woman. So it's, people are having a hard time they don't have, well, I'm calling them careers. And what I define as a career is in Georgetown, we talk about professional occupations and trades. Trades can be a career, but anybody that's working minimum wage jobs are going to have a hard time. And most of the folks that are getting minimum wage jobs are people that have a high school diploma or GED. So education, education is beyond a high school diploma is extremely important to be able to afford anything in our community, especially with inflation happening. You can't even get a gallon of gas right now under $5, so.
Real. Thank you so much for talking about really the lack of equal access to education, especially for our marginalized and disadvantaged and disenfranchised population, which when I look at the unemployment rate for African Americans, Baltimore City, we'll just go with that, which is a whole nother conversation, right? It's up there. It's up there with Minneapolis and Milwaukee, which, Dr. French, you and I have a connection to Minneapolis, right? I worked there, worked in pastor church. You got your PhD out there. So very challenging systemic issues out there. Definitely not to throw too much satire in it at this early in the game, but you mentioned the difference between what we say in the church world, vocation / career, and the whole entrepreneurial lifestyle. And a lot of folks, they are having to work at Instacart, Uber, Grubhub, DoorDash, Lyft, and shout out to all of them because we are looking for sponsors. Amen. But yeah, that is a challenge these days. Is I don't know how folks survive on one income alone. I mean, this bivocational model that clergy have had to adopt, where they're pastoring a church and having to work another job on the side or start something, is very challenging. But it's our reality now, as you were kind of told through your family of origin, that perception is reality. And we're seeing it every day. One thing I want to get into, though, you dropped that E word. And for those who are listening, I'm not talking about environmental, but it is an environmental context, is the entrepreneurship. Because I think that for especially the African descent population, we have the spirit of entrepreneurship. I mean, the historical Black college university was an entrepreneurial idea that came out of the Black church. From the plantation to the pulpits, we were able to create a Black church. So we're very creative and powerful people, descendants of kings and queens and African descent heritage. But I'm just wondering, why do you think there's such a strong fear around entrepreneurship in the Black community today? We hear all the stories about folks that don't pay their taxes. They don't know if they should go S Corp, LLC, LLP. I'm not going to bore everybody with all those acronyms. And then what is the economic disadvantage that we're facing outside of not making what we're worth? Because we've already seen in the Constitution, 3/5 of a person, and the earning gap and the achievement gap is only increasing among the African descent population.
Yes. So economic power is extremely, extremely, extremely important for communities as a whole. And so I'm going to break this down in two different conversations here. First, I want to talk about the importance of how long the dollar circulates in a community. Now, studies have shown that the African American dollar, so what that means is when an African American person earns their income, how long is the dollar staying in their community? Meaning, how long is that dollar supporting Black businesses, Black institutions, and things like that? There was a study done in 2018, I think it was by Gallup, where they analyzed just different communities: the Asian community, the Latino community, African American community, Caucasian community, Jewish community. And unfortunately, the African American dollar doesn't even stay in our community, not even a day, it's hours. The Asian community has done the best job of circulating their dollar in their community for at least 30 days. Extremely important. When you look at the economic power, what that means is the Asian community earns an income, they circulate the dollar in their community. So that means they only support their businesses. They will support their businesses before they go outside to another community. And the only reason they go outside to another community is because they don't have the knowledge or access. They go out to buy it, to study it, to learn it, and bring it back and create it in their community. Now, when people think of that, they're like, oh, that sounds like segregation. You know, it has an undertone of it. It's not what it really is. Same thing with the Jewish community. Jewish community, I think, was like right after African American community. If you look at how those communities operate just in the political sphere, the educational sphere, they have their own schools. They, sometimes when you walk into maybe their businesses, you only see people that look like them at the counter or on the leadership team. And the reason why that is because members, and this is based on what the study said, members in that community at a young age are taught to become entrepreneurs first, because they understand that the value of wealth you're not going to become wealthy on a W-2. In order to become wealthy, you have to become a maker or creator, or you have to start a business, because you are now determining, your wealth. Okay. Yes.
In this context, from the perspective of a person who grew up in suburban white privilege America with very little awareness of kind of the idea of institutions in a sense, I wanted to ask you, Dr. Francis, now I really, I'm starting to understand just the context that people, I think, are having a hard time grasping. Is it, like you say, that, for instance, historically speaking, in the Jewish community, there has been the idea of commerce and building, financial well-being for a very long time. Mm-hmm. They've been accruing assets and net worth and building markets on commodities and so forth for quite a while. Mm-hmm. And that's true also in general in sort of the developed world, that the white population, by a just overwhelmingly historical majority, has built these institutions. And that whether or not even, I sort of on thin ice in a way saying this, but whether or not the intention is, well, maybe it's not thin ice at all. The intention of the institution is specifically to favor their community. Once that institution becomes the platform that civilization is built on, because of the way people can network together their different interests, and it's all a bunch of white people, which is historically just what happened, then that institutionality favors who they know, who they relate to more naturally, the people that already understand how to participate because they've been raised in that culture, like you're saying, for instance, in Jewish culture, or often. And so that in a way, that also creates this absolute divide between the way people see the world. And
Yes.
and so now, it's funny kind of duality of these things. Like there's obviously an upside to the development that we have, and that we're all communicating on the same internet platform right now. And but there's so much inequality in the way the balance is distributed relative to the population of people and the quality of life inside the different cultures. And so I just want to kind of throw that in, that it's for the all creation listeners, maybe, which is probably more dominantly white American at the moment. That's also what's going on here. I think part of the Black Lives Matter conversation hasn't been able to penetrate the white American cultural mainstream view because it's been perceived as oppositional. It's like, no, the reality here is also just the historical balance is out of balance.
Yes.
Because of what you're talking about. There's not enough sharing on the entrepreneurialism and education and so forth. So kind of being redundant, but I just wanted to throw that in and see where it goes.
Oh, yes. And go ahead, Ray.
I'm a man of very few words, as you already know. But as I was hearing it too, I'm thinking to myself, I've often heard that in the Black community, we want to talk about generational wealth.
Yes.
A lot heard that colloquialism used a couple times on the podcast just in this brief time together. But we're avoiding the conversation around generational sacrifice.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just curious, Dr. Francis, from your vantage point, what are the sacrifices that we're running away from? Because you're right, we are the largest consumers in the US. We as Black people, for our allcreation.org listeners, we spend over $1 trillion. So we have resource, we have capital, we have economic wealth, but then there's also, and not to answer the question I'm already asking, but there also is self-hatred and internalized oppression that exists, i.e. the crabs in a barrel, which y'all can check out our podcast with Brother Trevor Jones on that one, that has created some type of issue, psychological barrier. So if you just bless us with that real quick.
Yes. Oh, gosh. One word, fear. Fear. I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. So I'm going to use myself as an example, and then I'm going to tell you some things that I've just seen just from community perspective in general. So when I was determining what career that I wanted to go into, in the back of my head, I had this thought, I don't want my family to grow up like I did, not having anything. So there was this level of selfish ambition that I want to get the highest paying job and just go with that. I didn't care, if I was going to be happy, which is why I'm glad my cousin had that conversation with me. Don't just go for the glitz and the glam, because you'll be ending up in a career you're going to eventually hate. Okay, so now but I was afraid there was a level of fear because I had the context of where I grew up and how I grew up and what I thought I had access to. Now going back, getting the college education, I'm a first generation college student. So I had the education. So the careers I had access to were a little higher paying. Okay, I'm gonna put that to the side. There's another thing that happens in our community, which people are like, well, what? This may not have any relevance. It does. Life insurance. I have friends, Caucasian friends, whose family came from nothing, but their family had a life insurance policy. So when that person died, that child didn't inherit the debt. They actually inherited wealth. And so one of the things that you will see nowadays, primarily in African-American communities, is not understanding how to invest in the future, how to pay it forward. People, say, oh, life insurance, blah, blah, blah. And then someone dies and there's a GoFundMe account. Hey, I can't afford to bury my family member. And then that loss of income, there is nothing supplemental to help the family. So now you're taking on additional debt or what have you. We, as a community, and there's a organization that's doing, it's like $1 billion debt pay down. They're doing this challenge to educate for free, because there are a lot of like financial freedom, education platforms out there. Was it Dave Ramsey has one, and there's some other folks, but it's called the $1 billion debt pay down challenge. But they don't just talk about debt, they just talk about wealth building, financial freedom, and how to invest in your future. So when I and Reverend, this story, when I took my first job, federal government career, earning pension, having the opportunity to invest, I did not know what to do. So I'm sitting at the table signing these documents. I'm like, oh, well, I don't need to invest here and invest there. I'll just take as much money in the paycheck with me, and then it's just leaving. It's leaving. I'm not saving. And then once I became aware of the importance of needing to save for the future, I had to break down that barrier of fear, because there's a fear of, I need it now. I need access to the money now. So we're thinking current and we're not thinking long term in the future. And so when you're weighing the, I guess the outcome of whether or not I can afford to live to take, because you remember I told you, it's like people are spending 49 hours of their earned work just to keep a roof over their head, and they're sacrificing, saving, and investing for wealth in the future. So a lot of times you'll see people in our community who are like 68, 70 still working because they can't afford to retire. Even if you're working, a job, or you become an employee, you can still find other ways to build wealth if you don't have the entrepreneurial spirit. I think education on finance needs to be taught at a younger age, because if you look at the communities that are doing extremely well, communities where people are taught to become entrepreneurs first, they're taught how to manage and handle money, how to build wealth at a younger age. I learned it once I had my college degree, because I didn't go into a finance. I took criminal justice. You don't learn about personal finance there. So I feel like, and there's actually a move here on the local level to bring financial literacy in the classroom as young as elementary school, teaching people how to save, open up bank accounts, the importance of investing, so that they can start to build that wealth. And once your income level increases and you start to network in circles with people who have wealth, they themselves will start to educate you, and your mindset will start to change. So it goes back to what Chris was talking about in terms of like just being able to have access, being able to network around folks that have the wealth.
And I realized I didn't really even specify what I was trying not to say something potentially explosive, which is just that the subtext here obviously is that the financial community is white. That again, the rebalancing is about that's just the way it is. It was built by this Caucasian or white European population over hundreds and hundreds of years, and that's what's going on here. Is it's fundamentally culturally biased towards the people it already knows and trusts, as well as being predatory and things like that. And I just feel like people have a hard time understanding that sometimes.
Oh yeah. And that's why you see a lot of policies coming down from the federal level trying to improve that outcome by earmarking and designating certain funds for Black minority-owned businesses, because you can own a business, but there's just barriers every step you get, the higher you go. But I think it starts with education, because if you know better, you do better. If you know how to access those systems, then you'll have a greater chance of just breaking down that glass ceiling, for lack of a better term, to just get the access, get the education, and start to teach it. But I do believe that if we start to teach it at a younger age, because I mean, if you look at the young children now, I mean, they're 5, 6 years old, and they know the computer better than half of us. Look at who millennials created social media, which was like the driving force for marketing for businesses. So we need to start teaching it in the community, because these aren't kitchen table discussions that are happening in communities that are disadvantaged or marginalized.
So since Chris already cracked open the lid, I'll just bust it wide open for the can of worms. So, state of Maryland has one of the highest numbers of Black billionaires per state, per capita population, however you want to say it. That's in the top 5 states. Then let's get down to the weeds. Baltimore City is them in Detroit, Michigan, are the highest 2 for Black population per capita. So Black cities, let me put it that way. Baltimore County has a lot of Black people because of folks that grew up in Baltimore City, got some money, got educated, no longer hood rich, if you will, and moved away, got them some land, property, all that good stuff. So we got a lot of Black people in Maryland. When I think of Baltimore City, again, as an outsider who has not spent enough time in W-2s, like you, Dr. Francis, in the state of Maryland, I think about the great crab cakes, great food, but then I think about one of my favorite TV shows. Shout out to HBO's original The Wire.
I know. Yep. Shout out to my friend Trey Chaney.
There we go. Live East Baltimore, right by City College, 3rd oldest public high school in the United States of America. So I think of squeegee boys, think about the drugs, the boarded up housing, all that stuff, all these socioeconomic, political, and environmental disadvantages that keep this city as a city in the shadows of DC and Philadelphia, which is right in the middle of. The question after you, Dr. Francis, is how do we turn hope as tangible as despair in a city that so many African Americans would like to keep it as it is? And again, I'm coming from my own mindset, saying that I'm not saying, yeah, that's how every Black person is. But I want to get controversial because so many people read about the city, that they're seeing that we're going through mayors and council people, and you have district attorneys, all this negative publication about just the city of Baltimore that impacts the overall topography and optical view of the state of Maryland. And for you as an elected official that's trying to, or candidate for elected official, excuse me, that's trying to change the system to make this a better place for the generations to come, just your standpoint on all that.
Yeah, really great question. You know, from just a layman's perspective, there is a lack of hope. I mean, there are children who are 13, 14, who say, I don't know if I'm going to make it to 22. I mean, how do you, if that is your reality, if you feel like you're growing up in a war zone, the mentality of the communities have to change. Now, what I know will work, but it's going to be slow to get this kind of solution implemented, is because there's a certain thing called separation of church and state. Now, I love God. Everything I do, I give reverence to God, because I wouldn't be sitting here today. But for those who understand the creator of all things, in Baltimore City, I go to a church called Life Source International Church. We have churches all over the world, and the mission is to bring hope and freedom to all people. When there is a mass shooting or something happening in one of the streets in Baltimore City, the Baltimore City Police Department calls our church to come out to do a prayer walk and to really just minister on the streets to people who have lost hope. And they have actually collected data that shows that after the church has come out, done the prayer walk, the crime decreases in the area. Now, these are concepts that are going to be really hard for government to wrap their mind around, but there is such a need for the faith-based community to get involved. And I don't know if anyone has heard of the term collective impact, but what that is, and that this is a platform that my campaign is centered on, collective impact, which really means that we have everybody humanly possible, businesses, organizations, community, people, including faith-based organizations, working to solve our societal ills from the level and sphere and the mission that they can. So let me break it down even further and give you an example. So let's just take crime. I have worked in the justice reform space for a very long time. And when I see people who have been convicted of violent crime, murder, assault, and they turn their lives around, 99% of them say the reason why they changed is because they found God. Period. They were connected, and in the research field, what we say is people need to be connected to hooks for change. So if that hook for change is God, amen. If that hook for change for you is, getting the mental health therapy you need to, heal and then reach back and ensure that your neighbor gets the same healing and treatment and access to the resource, great. But the government cannot solve the problem alone. It really takes all of us, because the government can write the policy to provide the resources. But if there are no organizations or people with the boots on the ground that are going to then take those resources and have the localized access to the community, then we're not going to see the change happen as fast as it can happen. I'm going to go back to, again, what is collective impact? So that means that, let's just take crime, for example. Studies also show that crime happens because there's a lack of education. People who don't have a high school diploma have a higher propensity to commit crime. People who are unemployed have a higher propensity to commit crime. People that do not have positive social support networks have a propensity to commit crime. So what does that mean? That means we need to make sure that our children are going to school, graduating, that their family members have access to housing, employment, healthcare, every single thing that a thriving citizen should have, so that they don't have to resort to violence or illegitimate means, because survival of the fittest has taught us that as a human, in order for me to survive, I have to have those tools: a roof, food, clothing, shelter. And if I can't get that because no one will hire me, the human is going to do what they need to do to survive, legal or illegal. That's just our nature. Now, why I go back to the importance of faith-based institutions. Faith-based institutions have been a pillar in many communities. Like if you even look at the laws on our books today, many of them have come, like the tenets and principles and values of just being a good citizen. You can connect them to 10 commandments in the Bible. You can connect them to just how different religions have, communicated values so that we can be positive, productive members of society. But if it's going to always tie back to hope. You cannot, if I'm a hopeless individual, I don't want to I'm going to do what I need to do to survive, point blank, period. And I could care less about, what's around me. So we really need to, the faith-based institutions can bring that hope and prosperity back to the people who need it. And then that needs to work in tandem with the resources, our government, to be able to fund and ensure that just basic things that are human rights. I mean, I'll say it again: access to education, healthcare, and employment. If I don't have those things, my city is going to continue to struggle the way it is. And that's just the reality. The research has said it, and there's no getting around it.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if you've been able to participate in these, after the mass shootings, your church goes in and so you have. So
yes.
So from a different perspective, we've been talking about this idea of a kinship worldview and other issues of all creation, and the idea that that's essentially about creating a world where we are each important individuals in a nurturing community. And to
Yes.
me, that's the answer I've been looking for my whole life to, like, what is it we're supposed to do? It's also what I hear in the New Testament when Jesus says, love thy neighbor as thyself. But so I'm just setting that as context. My assumption then, not knowing what's going on, and you've been there, is that because faith communities in these contexts, and you guys are missionally this way, are I would say relationally altruistic. You go to the individual.
Yes.
And you say, I'm sorry, or how are you, or here's some water, whatever the thing is, here's a hug. That changes the physiology and changes the psychology, changes the worldview. And so it's can you talk a little bit about just the doing of that? Is it about, to some degree, being seen and knowing that you are cared for? And as one pastor said to me not too long ago, everyone in the church is broken. The church is like a hospital.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, creating communities of healing and care.
Yeah, I mean, it's so important. Yes. So the answer is yes. And so for me, when I am out, like literally on the streets, just talking to folks, they hear things like, I've never seen someone care so much. I didn't know that, I had another way. Because when you grow up, and that goes to, again, how we were talking about wealth and all that. If we don't bring the resources to the community, but we expect that community, those communities who have lost hope, to come get the resources, it's never going to work. And it goes back to, the example you use. If you even look at all the stories of Jesus in the Bible and the 12 disciples, they went throughout the world. They went to the communities that needed the help. And there are certain basic tenets and principles that, are taught that in the church, that I believe that if we undergird our organizations with some of the similar missions, and I know there's this whole church separation of church and state, but these are just basic principles, like you said, loving your neighbor. Like what I've seen is we've gotten so numb. And when I say we, I'm talking about the people who they don't have to worry about these issues because it's not in their backyard. We've gotten so numb to the point where, my community is good, my household is good, so I'm not going to care about what's happening over in Baltimore City, because Baltimore County and Baltimore City are two different government entities. But I know, what was it, like I think it was last month, we had a drive-by shooting near our community, and they had a town hall. This doesn't happen in our community. These people weren't from here. But you want to know what? If we aren't making sure that those communities over there are taken care of, then the crime and all that will spill over. So that is the incentive to want to get involved, not just to ensure that there's no drive-by, but to genuinely care that my neighbor that doesn't have has. And if we can take that mindset as public policymakers, and I'm talking about, I don't care, there was I am a Democrat, and during the last election, it got really contentious. And so the chair, I'm the former chair of the local party here in the county, and the Republican chair, we got on the phone because it started to get really crazy, and we're like, hey, we got to make sure that people are running good, clean campaigns. And so we were like, when I die, it's not going to say Democrat or Republican on my coffin. It's going to say Crystal Francis, and whether or not you believe in God, child of God. And so I believe we need to take this mindset of just caring. I don't care what your political ideology is. At the end of the day, when you boil it down, we all want the same thing. We just have a little bit different idea how to arrive at the solution. And what collective impact does, it says, okay, what is the core outcome you're looking for? Improving the opportunity index, which means every human has access to the basic functions and things that they need, and then the education to pull themselves up, to get the boots, to get the straps. Now, with the faith-based institution, the reason why I believe is so important is, again, these are small hubs of community that have such a great influence that are being underutilized. And if we can start to deploy members of the community out to just, help solve some of these issues, like there aren't enough police officers. So, which is why they're reaching out to the faith-based community. Like we have no other options. You guys come out here and pray and minister to the community, and now they're not standing on the corner anymore. So it becomes a point of desperation where, and I don't care where you are, some people don't believe in God, but I can guarantee you every time America goes into war or some type of, if there's a tight situation, everybody starts, leaning on God then, so we need to really just start to look at our institutions and organizations, whether it's government, whether it's nonprofit, for-profit, faith-based, and begin to look at how we in our own power can make a simple, small change and impact. So one of the things my community is, my church is doing also to, combat the food desert challenge, we started a food pantry. So now people don't have to worry about standing in line, filling out an application, a backlog to get, while they're waiting for food assistance from the government. They can come to our church on a weekly basis and fill their trunk up with everything they need to feed their family. And it comes from just regular, members from the church who just donate because they have extra. So if we can get into that mindset, which is going to be a challenge, to really see that as a reality, but if we address it from the collective impact lens, it kind of takes off the religious perspective in our very diverse and inclusive society where it's more palatable in the policy space.
Just on continuing that thought process and really plug in your campaign, what are some of the principles that you're focusing on, and how can we as the community and the audience of listeners help carry out that vision and those principles that you're working on?
Yeah, so everything for me as a former diversity, inclusion, and council chair for the federal executive board, everything is undergirded with access, diversity, inclusion, and equity. Okay, so many people do not know that there in Baltimore County, there is a threat to having no women on the county council, our local legislative body. I was the only female candidate that made it out of my primary, and the current councilwoman is retiring. And it's so important that our decision-making bodies are diverse and representative and inclusive, because I have a different worldview. I have a different lived experience. And when we're talking about our decision-making bodies out here trying to solve societal ills in communities like mine, I believe in this value that the people who are closest to the problem should be a part of the solution. And oftentimes they're not invited to the table. So now you have a whole community of people who they see the problem, but they don't understand the problem, providing or telling that community what the solution is and how to get to it, when the person with the lived experience knows how they lived, how they thrived in that environment, and they know what the solution is from their perspective because they have the lived experience. I'm a qualitative researcher also, and that's what I study, lived experience, to make sure that we have policy that addresses the root cause. So what do I mean by that? So I'm going to give you, I don't agree with what I call a Band-Aid approach to public policy. That means that we see a social ill and we slap a policy on it to address the symptom and not the cause. I'm going to use crime because everybody, crime is like the number one thing on everybody's agenda right now. So there's a rise in violent crime. There's a rise in property crime. Okay. So the first thing that people like to do is let's get tough on crime. And I say we need to be smart on crime. I look at the why. Why are people being violent? Why are people committing property crime? And when you boil it all the way down to its core, it's poverty. Now, let's just forget all of that, what I said. What public policymakers like to do when they see a rise in crime, they say, hey, let's make tougher laws, let's do this, let's do that. And then you see the whole war on drugs era where African Americans were targeted for marijuana, and now we're trying to decriminalize marijuana. And then you had, once the opioids spilled into other communities, it no longer became a war on drugs, but now it became a public health crisis, right? So we need to ensure that the people who are experiencing these problems, who have, maybe not necessarily been impacted the same way, or maybe they have been impacted and they've overcome the challenge, are at the table for the solution. We're not seeing that because our legislative bodies are not diverse and inclusive on the local level. In Maryland, however, our statewide legislative body is one of the most diverse in the nation. But when we start looking at the local government, because all politics are local, the residents see the effects of the crime and the food deserts and the overcrowding in the schools. And the policies are funneled from this federal, state, and local. They provide the resources and the funding, but it is the local government that determines how those resources are being allocated across systems. And what you will see, because there aren't many, there's only one African American on our 7-member council, one woman. Now, if God forbid I don't win my election, there will be no women, which will take us back to 1956, and we just can't have that. We have to have diversity, because I'm going to see things a different way. I am going to have a different kind of voice because of my lived experience. So, it's so important. Diversity is so important. Equity is very important, but you can't be a government that says, I'm going to be equitable and I'm going to ensure it's diversity, when your own body, decision-making body, doesn't reflect that. So we have to practice what we preach.
Definitely. Well said. Well said. And we are definitely sending our prayers and positive thoughts over to you, Dr. Francis, hopefully soon to be Delegate Francis. Which I think you have such a bright future ahead of you. So one of the things that we've just really been curious about from the all creation and biointegrity side of the house is what is just your vision, if you could just say it in a tweet or Facebook post, or back in my day, a MySpace post, to our audience, our viewers, our listeners, especially as you have such a privileged voice, that we have the privilege of carrying your story on this platform. You have such an amazing story to share with the world. So just what's your message to the world?
So this is my message to the world, and it's a mantra that I have lived upon, coming from a family of public servants, is that do your part, whatever that is, to make your community great. Use your privilege and your platform to elevate the voice of someone that is voiceless. And I, specifically to my Caucasian brothers and sisters, and I'm going to go back to the Black Lives Matter epidemic, even civil rights. We would not be where we are as a community unless we all worked together. And I used to always have, people from the community who would say, well, I hate that this is happening. What can I do? I told them, use their privilege to provide a platform for someone, because when you have, and that's what I'm doing, getting this education, having this PhD has given me a sense of privilege, and I'm being invited on stages where I can bring awareness to things. You'd be surprised, a lot of everyday citizens really don't know what's really going on in the world. And when we learn about it, if we can just share it and give somebody else the opportunity. Now, people who hate, they don't want to be involved in politics, they don't want to, that's fine. Do your basic civic duty and exercise your right to vote. No matter who you vote for, exercise that fundamental right and choose the person who you believe is going to represent your values the best. Civic engagement and participation is so important. If you are a retired school teacher and you, still have it within you to just want to contribute, start a tutoring program, in a underprivileged school. If you are a mom and you are sitting, at used to be a PTA representative, and now your children are grown, stay on the PTA for somebody else whose mom doesn't have the time because she's got to work 2, 3, and 4, and 5 jobs to make ends meet. if we can just use whatever our God-given gifts and talents are to really serve someone else, I think we'll get further into society and solving some of these social ills. So just really do your part, is as simple as I can boil it down. Whether that's sharing a tweet on Facebook or Instagram to tell someone when to vote, whether that's banding together 4 or 5 neighbors because maybe your neighbor next door's house burned down and she didn't have house insurance and they need clothing and shelter to get by, to help do something to make sure that they can get some straps to pull themselves up. But if we can just do that, that'd be amazing.
May I just jump in and say, I hear in that, do your part, this idea of seeing yourself in and taking on the role of being a member of a nurturing community. When you look at people, instead of stranger danger, you're going already with this, how can I help you? Or what's something I can do here that's helpful?
Yes.
And that mindset is just, it's so critical in our self-esteem paradigm, our worldview paradigm right now. So
yes. Yes.
So great to hear these things voiced in different ways, that are principle values that are in our religions, in a more articulate way than the sort of, we all know what love thy neighbor as self means. Like we're talking in a more direct way about how to act that out. And I really appreciate it.
Yes.
Yes, and just thank you for reiterating that, because on a theological perspective, I mean, we also think about the feeding of 5,000, right? The person who had the fish and the loaves could have just had a feast themselves, but Jesus was like, "No, let's take this scarcity and make a surplus," and that's just a mindset of we're all responsible for our actions and reactions to situations, but we also have a due diligence and a responsibility to do our part to make this the transformative environment that we wish to see in our society. So I'm very thankful, Dr. Francis, for you, one, being able to run the course and as it is, because there are so many disadvantages and disparities for women of color. And to be very transparent, Black women, grew up in a household of Black women, product of a Black woman. So I understand a lot of the disparities, challenges, sexism, ageism, and racism, all the isms that you all go through. But also the fact that you were brave, courageous, and willing to say yes, to put your name on the line, to be in conversations that we've had of a public sphere. You are going to be scrutinized and criticized and demonized instead of celebrated during the campaign season. And if that's everybody.
Yes. Look, and all those who are out there, if you could just lift up a simple prayer, because let me tell you, it's hard work. And one of the things that I said to myself as a believer, I said, well, I can't look. If Jesus was chastised and criticized, who am I? So I'm putting on this thick skin because it is a cutthroat game, but I do have an end goal and purpose, and I always live by this: in all things do unto the glory of God, and that's what I plan to do. That's what I plan to do.
And while we have our listeners, before we close out the segment, any websites you want to direct us to, or anything that you want to direct our audience?
Yeah, so there are 2 websites. If you're really interested in learning more about my story, there was a documentary that was done on me and how I ended up in the public policy space. It's called The Degree of Impact. You can watch that at thedegreeofimpact.com. And also, if you're interested in learning more about what I'm doing in Baltimore County and my campaign, my website is www.crystalfrancis.com.
And that will link us to all your social media and all that good stuff, and YouTube, and wow. So again, Dr. Francis, just thank you so much for blessing us with this sliver of your time in such a busy and chaotic and just jam-packed season of transformation that you're in. I mean, from job transformation to political transformation to just human symbolic transformation that you're doing. Thank you for your service to our political system, to our education system, and to the state of Maryland, particularly as well. And just thank you for sharing your time with us. You all heard it from the best, Dr. Crystal R. Francis. Please go check out those links that she shared. It will also be on our website at allcreation.org. Please continue to check out the content and the rich material that we're presenting. We're so thankful again to have Dr. Francis with us, as she added another powerful voice and testimony to our theme this month of Envisioning Transformation. We have been carrying her story of just power, her story of promise, and her story of prevailing against all the odds. And we are just so thankful to have this opportunity and this privilege to honor her voice during this segment. I hope that you all take her up on doing your part and being able to create the world that you wish to see, to make this better today than it was yesterday.
Thank you.